Well, everyone, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to this Productivity and Robert Half Inspiring Speakers Summer Series and week one of that series. It's great to see you all here and we're really excited that you're joining us to kick off this summer series. My name's Paul Middleton. I'm a Managing Director in Productivity and I'm joined here today by my colleagues from Productivity as well as by my colleagues from Robert Half. Some of you may have joined our previous series, the Imaginatively Series 1, where over the last 20 weeks we've had some fantastic panelists and attendees who discussed the challenges they were facing during the first 20 weeks of COVID and the impact it was having on UK PLC. We talked about disruption, resilience, reimagination and recovery. And in doing that, we hopefully sparked some ideas for you, our attendees, and allowed you all to join the dots to your own challenges and give you greater confidence to make the right decisions. This is series 2.
The majority of students would get the results they expected.
I think someone's just got the news on in the background. You wouldn't mind just muting the news? It may be better than my intro, but if you wouldn't mind, that'd be fantastic. So this is series 2, and we've decided to take a slightly different approach because we think that now is the time for us and for you, our clients, our partners, our friends, to change. Because without that change, without being disruptive, we run the risk of becoming irrelevant in the dynamic world we're living in. So we've lined up some amazing speakers over the course of the next few weeks who will bring you fresh perspectives from outside the traditional business world and who will bring you new ideas, unexpected insights, and will challenge your normal way of thinking. And we think this will help you in your business world. At Productivity and Robert Half, we think the future demands us to be different and that many of us need to spend more time reimagining our future. So we're very excited to be able to create this platform to give you the opportunity and the encouragement to think differently, be bolder, and to face the future with more confidence. To kick us off today, I'm delighted to say we have BAFTA award-winning Tim Reid. He'll speak about what laughter and humour does to our brains. Tim is the creator and co-writer of the BBC One sitcom Car Share, starring Peter Kay, and more recently, Meet the Richardsons. Car Share, as many of you will know, won a huge number of awards. As well as winning the BAFTA for Best Scripted Comedy, Car Share also won Best Original Programme at the Broadcast Awards, Most Popular Comedy Series at National Television Awards, and the Best TV Entertainment Programme at the Television and Radio Industries Club Awards. I think Tim's pointing out the accolades in the background there.
Just a couple there, just a couple in shot.
Just dotted around. So aside from script writing, Tim specialises in coaching, training and leading teams to increase their creativity, reimagine their future, reignite their creative potential and be more innovative. So what more could you want on a Thursday morning? Very shortly, Tim's going to be speaking for around 40 minutes on humour, laughter, innovation and how they are connected. And then you'll all have the opportunity to ask him questions. If you want to send your question through on the Teams chat while Tim is speaking, please feel free to do so, and I'll take that to Tim at the end of his session. Otherwise, we'll open the floor to questions when Tim is finished, and ask everyone to very politely raise their virtual hands in Teams. You'll see the icon at the bottom of the screen, and then I'll come to you to ask Tim your question. Just a word of warning: as many of you are now, there's a number of people on mute. And I'm no good at lip reading, so when you do ask your question, please remember to take yourself off mute. And if you're on a phone, you may need to do that by pressing *6. So without further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to Tim. He's the first. He's very kindly offered to be the first of our panelists for this series, so please be nice to him. Tim, the floor is yours, sir.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Paul. Just checking I'm not on mute.
You're not on mute. We can hear you.
All right. Thank you. It's a hot day. I've not seen this many faces since. I should probably best you just finish your own punchline there, isn't it? Yeah, my name's Tim Reid. As Paul said, I'm probably best known these days as TV comedy writer. I co-created and co-wrote Peter Kay's Car Share, or as I prefer to call it, Car Share. But when I'm writing new TV comedy or radio comedy, it's really just me practicing what I preach, because the main thing I've done for about 20 years now is help teams around the world up their creativity and have bigger, better ideas. So running brainstorms, thought showers, suggest fests, tissue sessions, whatever you want to call them, those times when we get together to collaborate, to be creative and have ideas. So I worked in ad agencies around the world and for What If, the big global innovation consultancy, before I had my first sitcom commissioned. So that's what I've done, is help teams learn how to be more creative together. And I've run brainstorms around the world for all sorts of brands in all sorts of sectors. And a few years ago, I had a bit of a revelation. And that was, I'd noticed that there's a moment in all of those creative collaborations when the magic happens. There's a moment when we suddenly start to collectively switch on those light bulbs, and our creative juices start flowing, and we start bouncing ideas around. And up to that moment, it's kind of been in, a bit of head scratching. Someone stood at a flip chart. Someone's been in charge of the Post-its, looking at each other's faces, going, has anyone got anything? And the thing that happens, the trigger point when the creativity collectively just starts to flow, is that somebody said something that's made everyone else laugh. Suddenly there's laughter in the room and all sorts of things change. And that's what I'm going to talk about over the next 40 minutes is, why does laughter do that? And how can we use that? And what can we learn from the world of comedy to make that more inevitable, make it easier for us to get some laughter in the room? And the reason it happens at that time is that when somebody suggests a brilliant idea, it makes us laugh. There's something about a brilliantly original idea that initiates the same reaction, the same response in us, just as humans, that laughter does, that jokes do. And I realized I wasn't the first person to have noticed this, because as I looked into it, I found that the advertising legend David Ogilvy, so Ogilvy, who set up Ogilvy and Mather ad agency, wrote loads of books on advertising in the 60s and 70s. Reputedly, the guy Don Draper in Mad Men is based on. He said the best ideas come as jokes. Make your thinking as funny as possible. The best ideas come as jokes. Make your thinking as funny as possible. So I realized I wasn't mad. This isn't something that I'd noticed on my own, and I was just looking for it because I was into comedy. One of the biggest names in world advertising, in one of the most creative sectors, had said the same thing. What he didn't mean was that the best ads are funny, and I think a lot of people have interpreted that. He didn't mean that. He meant the best ideas make us laugh. The best ideas come as jokes, come as somebody just suggesting something because they think it's a bit mad. So I kind of thought, right, there's something in this then. I've seen it all around the world in all sorts of different cultures. Laughter gets our creativity flowing. So I thought, well, what is it that I and David Ogilvy have spotted? And I thought, actually, it's a comedy writer, someone who's now making their living out of writing TV comedy and, who's worked in innovation. I'm pretty well placed to try and unpick this. What's going on? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, actually, original ideas and jokes share the same core structure. I think they share the same DNA. And that is that jokes, the root of all comedy, I think, is surprising truths. Right. So if you think about, whether it's stand-up comedy or a sitcom character or a sitcom episode, a situation, the thing that makes us laugh is a truth mirrored back to us, but in a way we hadn't thought of before. Most observational stand-up, whether it's Michael McIntyre and his man draw, or Peter Kay saying it's that fine rain that soaks you through, and just those silly observations where we go, oh my God, you're right, makes us laugh. Same with characters. We all know a David Brent. Ideas are the same. They're born out of surprising truths. So in any ideas session, what you're looking for is something that's born out of a truth or an insight, but that's an original thought. So it surprises us. And that's why in an ideas session, when somebody goes, what if we did it this way? I now, when I'm training people, say, if you get laughter in the room, if suddenly you find somebody suggested something and it's made everyone else laugh, see that as a red flag. It probably means there's a bit of genius, a bit of surprising truth in there, and you need to kind of try and uncover it. A nice example of that is I was doing a big innovation project for Virgin Atlantic a few years ago, where they were trying to come up with ideas for how they could steal business class passengers from British Airways. This was about 10, 12 years ago, when particularly for business travel, if you worked at a successful organization and they were going to send you off to New York, you'd expect to be sent at that time British Airways, maybe Emirates, something like that. But Virgin Atlantic was seen as, well, you know, we can't be doing that great. So they thought, how can we change that? How can we come up with ideas that would help us steal business class passengers from British Airways? And we'd come up with a few. We got a few things on the walls, you know, better Prosecco, you know, a better choice of videos, a bit more legroom. Nothing felt very groundbreaking. And then somebody said, like, if we're serious about stealing business class passengers from British Airways, we need to do something groundbreaking. I don't know, we should offer all of our business class passengers their own prostitute. So from as soon as they get to Heathrow, all the way on the plane till they land in New York, they have their own escort with them all the way. And everybody laughed and thankfully didn't say to her, well, that's, you know, illegal and immoral, you're fired, get out. But they said, what are you talking, why, where are you coming from with that? And she said, well, you know, people they want to be made to feel like kings and queens. They're away from home. It's kind of legal no man's land over the Atlantic. You know, to de-stress as well. They might, you know, be anxious about the flight or their presentation in New York. And they thought about it. And once they had stopped laughing, they said, well, I don't know, is there a way we could do something like that isn't just so nasty? And they turned that into giving all of their business class passengers an Indian head massage. It's a step or two back from the original idea. But they did it and they launched it. And actually, if you think about it, it's something that intimate. It is a bit groundbreaking, and they did a whole big campaign. BA wouldn't give a shatsu. That's right, isn't it? That's not the dog, that's the massage. And they won a load of awards, and British Airways copied it, and they started giving it. I think they now do hand massages, and but it all came from somebody going, do you know what, I'm just going to say something and see if it makes everyone laugh. And actually, the trick there, and again, it's a big thing I preach when I'm doing training now, is that what often stops us in an idea session of coming up with those original ideas is the thought that if I suggested that, I think people would laugh at me if I suggested that. So I feel I'm on a mission really to switch that mindset around and say, don't think I won't say it in case people laugh. You say it in thinking, I think this might make people laugh, because laughter, not only I think do we laugh at great ideas, but when we get laughter in the room or the Zoom these days, it actually does something to our brains and gets our brains into gear for creative thinking. And there's a lot of science behind this. In fact, there's a whole science around laughter actually called gelatology. And again, I've looked into the science behind laughter and humor and what it does to our brains. And there's quite a big study done by a Professor Karuna Subramaniam over at UCSF in California. Where she looked into what does humor do to our brains and why is it helping us be more creative. And she took 3 samples of people and gave them all exactly the same creative challenge. It was like a creative problem solving challenge. I think it was like a word association puzzle where there would be a kind of a measurable amount of solutions or ideas that they could come up with. And these 3 samples of people, she put one in front. They all had a different bit of stimulus before they were given the exercise. One sat through a Robin Williams gig, so a live comedy performance. They watched that and then they were given the task. Another group was shown The Shining, so the horror film The Shining, and then they were given the same task. And the other group were forced to sit through a lecture in quantum mathematics, and then they were given the same creative task. And what she found was the group that had watched the comedy came up with demonstrably more and better ideas. They were just in a much more creative mindset. And then she put like MRI scans on the same people to go, well, what is it that's going on in their brains? What is happening in their brains that's helping them to do this? And she noticed that there's a bit of the brain that is commonly associated with problem solving or making, you know, fresh connections, called the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex. And she found that the laughter, response to humor, gave that bit of the brain was much more active in those people that had watched the comedy. And again, I've looked into more of this, and so there's a neurologist called Frederick Fabricius. She does a lot of talks, written books on, again, what humor does and what laughter does to us as humans related to creative thinking. And she thinks that that humor and laughter releases a couple of things in the brain, a couple of chemicals that help us make fresh connections and have different responses. It releases serotonin, which apparently helps us with our emotional responses to things, whether we really like something or not. And laughter also releases dopamine, which is kind of helps us make fresh connections. It's kind of one of the chemicals in the brain that helps us connect one thing to another. So laughter is a bit like, it's kind of like chemical crack cocaine for the brain, basically. It gets the brain buzzing, is a layman's way of putting it, I think. So when we've got together to kind of bounce ideas around, it's incredibly powerful. The other thing laughter does, according to Frederick, is it symbolizes trust and safety. In looking into it, she reckons that we as a species learnt to laugh before we learnt to talk. And it was a way of kind of sharing this relief of stress. So I kind of picture a bunch of us in a cave, and the saber-toothed tigers wandered out of the picture now, and we laugh out of relief. But it kind of the hangover of that is laughter is something we do with people we trust. And it helps embed that sense of trust, right? We're sharing a joke, we're sharing a truth. And so the fact that we feel safe together when we're being creative, again, helps us suggest the ridiculous to each other. So imagine, your last idea session you've had, if everyone sat there kind of holding their chin and staying in a serious mindset, it's very difficult to get everyone suggesting things that risk sounding absurd. And as Einstein said, actually, Albert Einstein said about creativity, he said, if at first the idea doesn't seem absurd, then there's really no hope for it. And if you think about it, if we're trying to come up with original ideas, ideas that are going to change whatever it is that the problem that we've got, it needs to sound ridiculous to start with. It needs to somehow not quite fit how we'd seen the world up to that point. And so if you can get laughter in the room, you're basically signaling to everybody that it's okay to do that. Okay, so how do we do it? So I think if that's established that it's important, laughter, humor helps us have bigger, better ideas. How do we do it? What I'm not suggesting, I should make this clear, is that we all try and be comedians at work. No one wants an office full of the office clown. It's fraught with danger that suddenly you'll just have a team full of David Brents and everybody trying to be funny, and that's a nightmare. That's not what I'm suggesting, but there are a lot of principles and ways of working that we can steal from the world of comedy, just to make that kind of sense of humor and laughter in our team Zooms or brainstorms, and more comfortable. And so here's kind of 3 top tips. One is the energy. Humor it can be about energy, and that can be about how you set up at the beginning. And it's just getting the energy right. And this is as true on a Zoom as it is in any kind of brainstorm. And there's lots of things that I've seen in the world of comedy. So in comedy professionals, whether it's writers' rooms, teams of writers working on a show, but also in the world of improv. So if you're learning any comedy improv, these are some techniques that people use to get into the right mindset. And using that, and if I start talking about warm-ups and icebreakers, again, I think I can hear your toes curling from here. The warm-ups, icebreakers, there's nothing that feels more David Brent, I don't think. And over the years in brainstorms, it's been done so badly that everyone's had a bad experience of the facilitator bringing out his bag of wigs and a little box of ukuleles and asking everyone to share what their party piece is. And if it's done badly, there's nothing worse. So the trick is if you're the facilitator of this, is to have a few up your sleeve and think what feels right for our culture, the context we're in, the kind of people I've got now. I need to get everyone relaxed in a place where we can have a bit of a laugh and a joke together. And what feels right will be different to every group. A few things I've learned from the world of improv. There's one that I've used on Zoom a lot. That I think really works, but again, you might think it's horribly cringy. One thing that they do in improv to warm up is a thing that it's often called chicken monster, but it can be anything. Essentially, what you do is you get people into pairs, and you mirror each other for a minute. And you can do this on Zoom by opening the breakout rooms, or I'm sure Teams does the same thing and send people off into pairs. And I'm going to imagine I'm doing this with Jamil just because I can see him on the screen now. But the way this works is between you as a group, you think of a word and then an action that goes with it. That's why it's something like Chicken Monster. So then one person would start and go, say the word and then repeat it with an action. So it might be you go, Chicken Monster, right? And whoever you're doing that with, I know, but whoever you're doing that with, and I can see Jamil, so I'm going to ask Jamil to do it. If you can't, I just imagine he's done the same thing back to me. So Jamil, all we'd do is you'd mirror it. So if I go Chicken Monster, you'd do it back, but you'd spot something I did and exaggerate it slightly. So if we try it, so Chicken Monster.
Chicken Monster.
Exactly. And then I saw your eyes go wide.
Wait.
Chicken Monster.
Chicken Monster.
Yeah. And you just keep doing it. You do that for a minute. And what happens is it starts to exaggerate because you've spotted something and then you've turned it up a bit and then the other person turns it up a bit. And before long, it's then utterly ridiculous and someone's going, Chicken Monster, like that. And you just get some laughter in the room. Any version of that. There's all sorts of different ways of getting some laughter in the room. What it does, if you probably feel then, the energy changes completely. The reason it's so important is normally when we get together to have ideas, everybody's got into and again, it's the same whether it's a room or a Zoom, whether it's remote or in the boardroom. Everyone's come from a different start point. So someone might have just been on the phone to a client, someone's been poring over spreadsheets, somebody might have just had a call from one of the kids. And then we get everybody together and go, right, let's be creative. Let's come up with some ideas. And normally, if we're still in a serious mindset, it's very difficult to then get into a kind of a more humorous state where we can unleash our creativity. So thinking about the energy and getting that right is really important. Find what works for you to get some laughter in the room. And again, when I've said before that the root of all comedy, I think, is surprising truths. One way to do it on a team meeting is just think of what is a new truth that we can just suddenly talk about and be human. It could be about the storms last night. It could be about something that's happened in the news, but find a way of kind of introducing it with some humor, a new shared truth, but talk about it in a surprising way and just in a way of making us human rather than being formal and business as usual. Nothing kills creativity and thinking differently more than just staying rigidly in business as usual mindset. So humor is a great way of throwing that out. So energy is one thing. Humans, not business people, that we can tap into our inner child. And we were probably at our most creative, at our most imaginative when we were kids, when we were more playful. Playfulness is critical. In fact, someone else who does a lot of talks about creativity, who comes from the world of comedy, is John Cleese. He's been doing talks on creativity for, well, I think ever since his first expensive divorce, he started doing a lot of corporate gigs about creativity. He must have just had another one because he's got a book out in September on creativity called Creativity. He could have done better with that, couldn't he, really? I just thought. But one of Cleese's big and very simple philosophies around the role of humor in creativity. He says, if you want your teams to be more creative, give them time and space to play, right? And in terms of the importance of playfulness, it's such a simple quote, but it's so important and also so insightful, I think, that most businesses, particularly at a time of serious need for creative thinking, when the world has got very serious, when the challenges we face on the face of it are incredibly serious, it can seem counterintuitive to build in the time and space to play. But if we're going to think differently and come up with different solutions to problems, it's critical that we find a way of building in the time and space to play. Because when we play with our thinking, and it's not about, jumping in and out of sandpits or making sure we've got Lego in the office or having a big slide from one floor to the other. You know, all those things work, and in some organizations, they are their way of signaling to everybody we are a playful organization. That's not always the right thing to do. That doesn't mean playfulness isn't. What I mean by playfulness is not about feet in the sandpit necessarily. It's about being playful with our thinking. It's about building in the time and space where we can say, right, we're going to get playful. We're going to allow ourselves permission to just wonder about different possible solutions. And when we start to have an idea, we'd be playful with it and just see where it goes. Let our imagination fire. So playfulness is a critical behavior. The next one is bravery. And I think you do need to be brave to be able to introduce humor and the possibility that things you say might get laughed at. You need to be brave to be able to announce ideas that on the face of it might seem absurd to start with. So again, as a facilitator of an idea session, it's critical, I think, that you signal to everybody this is a safe place to play, so you can feel brave enough to that thought that you've just got in the back of your head, let it out there. Because if that person at Virgin Atlantic had thought in the back of their head, I think we should offer all our business class passengers a prostitute, she will have had a little voice in the back of her head going, you can't say that. You can't, you're risking being fired. And we all have that little voice in the back of our head. And if in your head at the moment you're going, well, I haven't got a voice in the back of your head, that's the voice at the back of your head saying you haven't got a voice. We've all got it. We've all got that. But what we need to do when we're being creative is be brave enough to shut that voice up for a bit and go, no, it doesn't matter. I'm going to just suggest it. See where this goes. So bravery is critical. The next creative behavior, the third one I'm going to talk about is about nurturing thoughts into ideas. Right? It's critical when we're having ideas, when we're in an ideas session, that we allow thoughts to grow into big ideas. And again, there's a bit of technique here that I think we should totally steal from the world of comedy. If you ever do any improv, if anyone ever does any improv training, any comedy training, any stand-up training, one of the first techniques you're taught is something they call yes and. Right? And it's a simple technique, a way of keeping an idea alive. And if you can remember Whose Line Is It Anyway, or any of those kind of things, this is the root of all of those successful sketches. And the way it works is basically, you know that if you're going to be on stage and people we're all improving and coming up with something, what kills it is if somebody doesn't do yes and closes something down. So imagine that kind of a classic one of, it's a dinner party and the first person is you're hosting a dinner party and someone's going to turn up. And if the first person to turn up goes, hello, I'm the vicar, I'm here for the tea party. And if you as the host go, oh no, that's the tea party's next Wednesday, then the whole thing's dead. But if everybody does yes and, so you go, hello, I'm the vicar, I'm here for the tea party. Oh yes, and the nuns are in the corner, they've got the vodka. So the vicar comes in, and then whoever was the nuns go, oh yes, vicar, we've been expecting you. And basically what you're doing is like the idea is a balloon, you know, and you're keeping the balloon up in the air. That technique, that philosophy is critical in any idea session. You're keeping the idea afloat. And just by doing yes and, what you're doing, the yes is going, okay, I accept your ridiculous idea. Okay, prostitutes on flights, yes, okay, and then you build on it. And then what if we did it in a way that was legal? And that's how you get to a good idea. So if you get everybody being playful, being brave, and adopting a kind of a yes and keep the idea afloat, then you're going to have laughter in the room and you're more likely to have a better idea. So that's three things. So we've talked about energy, talked about behaviors. I think someone's not on mute. And I think and then the third thing is tools and techniques. What exercises can we learn from the world of comedy that will just help us have ideas? And there's a couple of techniques, a couple of exercises that I think that are easy to adopt. Because one thing we often do is we get together to have ideas, and without stimulus, without pre-planning exercises, it's too easy to be left staring at a blank sheet of paper going, has anybody got anything? And then no matter how much laughter we get in the room, you know, still you need the sparks to help you have ideas in the first place. And there are certain exercises, again, that we can steal, I think, from the world of comedy to help us have ideas. One I love is I call it act it, but it's basically take the challenge and act it out. And so a couple of stories. I do this with all the clients that I'll have an ideas session with, or an innovation challenge, where I'll think of different ways we could bring to life the challenge. One nice easy way is I call what would Batman do. I've had to update that for more and more clients get younger and younger, so it's ended up being, what would Doctor Who do? Last time I did it, I think it was what would Harry Potter do? It doesn't matter. It works. It's basically thinking of who would be interesting to challenge, to bring to this challenge, to solve this challenge, and what would they do? Another way to act out the challenge is to do it literally. So again, a nice example. I did this with M&S Foods. They were looking to reinvent the stir fry. I don't remember the stir fry riots. A lot of innovation is born out of a consumer need, like we need a new thing. Sometimes it isn't. They just wanted to, what was the next thing in stir fry that they could put on their shelves? And we'd had a few ideas, and then I thought, well, let's get them to act it out, see if we can get some more laughter in the room. What would that do? And it was back in the days when we could all get together to have ideas. And in fact, it was in the noughties when one of the unwritten rules of idea sessions where we all sat on big, colourful bean bags. You remember those days? So I created a circle out of the bean bags and said, right, there's our wok. And I gave each of the clients tasks. So somebody was the oil, somebody was the chicken, someone was the noodles, someone was the mange tout. We'd warmed up to this point. I didn't just launch this on them at kind of 9 o'clock in the morning. So they were all up for it. So we'd got the wok, then the oil jumped in, started sizzling around a little bit. The chicken jumped in, the noodles jumped in, the little baby sweet corn, she jumped in. They all started sizzling around a bit. And after a while, I stopped it and said, right, OK, how was that? And the oil said, well, actually, I was nowhere near warm enough when people just started jumping in. You hadn't given me time to get hot enough. And the chicken said, actually, I'm now worried I might kill somebody because I'm still raw in the middle. To which the mange tout said, well, actually, that's ironic because I've been desperate for you to stop it. I wilted ages ago. I'm overcooked now. And so they laughed a bit. And then we said, well, is there anything we can learn from that? And I said, actually, yeah, one of the things we do get complaints about is that some things will overcook and others undercook. We kind of say it cooks between 12 and 14 minutes or whatever. And how do you get it all perfect? So we had a few ideas on the back of that. The one they ended up running with, and they launched and a product that did really well for them, is that they cut all the ingredients to different sizes and shapes and made a proposition of the fact that they'd done this so that everything cooked at exactly the same time. And it did really well for them. So that's kind of just by acting it out. So that's one exercise you can use. Another I often use, and I'll use in idea sessions, that again is a tried and tested technique from the world of script writing, and particularly comedy, I think. And that is about random links. So I call it chance it, but it's basically putting two things together that have never been put together before. It's a great creative technique. In fact, some people define creativity as saying creativity is about putting two things together that have never been put together before. I actually think that's a narrow definition of what creativity is, but it's a great idea generation technique. So a lot of writers will kind of, flick through a filmography of all films ever made, and then maybe, I don't know, flick through an encyclopedia in the old days of it being in books and get to two random pages, and you might get Jaws in one book and then, I don't know, weather in another. And I don't know how else they came up with Sharknado. It must have been like that must be how they did it. And the way I do it in an idea session with a client on any challenge is I have a bag of just random stuff, bits and bobs. And I'll go around, once we've had a load of ideas, I'll use this technique just to re-inject a bit of humor and get people thinking again. And so people just dip their hand in, whatever they pull out, they need to go on like a random, like a word association flow from this item until they come to something that they can link to the challenge and go, there's an idea. So a story, I did this with Pepperami, where Pepperami were looking for new formats. What do we do next with Pepperami? We've kind of done certain things. Where do we go? And we'd had a few ideas. Then I went round with the bag and someone stuck their hand in and they pulled out a little stuffed toy donkey, a little donkey. And so you kind of think, donkey, 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 where does that take me? And how can I rethink Pepperami? It was just before the horse meat scandal. So they didn't go there, fortunately. He went, donkey, donkey. So if I said to you, donkey, you'd probably say, I don't know, Shrek, green, veggie, a veggie Pepperami. Quite a nice idea. This guy went, donkey, donkey. Donkeys are well hung like a donkey. Hung like meat that's well hung, meat that's extra cured, extra mature Pepperami. Interesting. He landed that. That was one idea. He kept going, thankfully. You had donkey, mule, kick like a mule, punch, punch, bunch of fives, 5 mini Pepperamis in a multi-pack. They launched it. It did really well from them. All came from a donkey. Who knew? So to sum up, so I'm like David Ogilvy. I think the best ideas come as jokes. And I think you need to make your thinking as funny as possible. And it's not about being the office clown. It's not about trying to be a comedian. It's about understanding what humor does to our brains. Humor gets our brains into a creative place and a place and a space and a mindset that allows us to be much more imaginative. And as a group, if we can signal to our group when we're having ideas that this is a safe place to be more playful and suggest ideas that at first might seem absurd, then you're much more likely to have bigger, better ideas. The other great thing about it, just to finish on, is it's much more fun. It's much more fun. If you're going to carve out some time where we need to solve a serious challenge, it's much more fun as well as being much more effective and productive if we're having a laugh while we're doing it. So that's the end of my talk this morning. It's been a real pleasure sharing that with you. I do a lot of talks on the role of creativity and humour and how we can get that, helping our teams get really firing in terms of innovation and creativity. But it's been a real pleasure talking to you this morning. I'll hand back to you, Paul.
Tim, thank you very much for that. That was fantastic. We said we were going to go with Q&A, but we obviously could go to Chicken Monster. We could go to Yes and. We could go to Active. We could go to a number of things, but I won't be that brave yet. We'll see where this takes us. There've been a few questions coming through, and I'll come to every. So if people do have questions, what I'd ask is if they could put up their hands, and while you work out where that is at the bottom of the screen and see the little virtual put your hand up thing. Tim, I'll just take a couple of questions to you that have come through while you've been speaking. How do you deal with colleagues who have no sense of humour?
So I think it's a great question. I think it's all about in the setup of the ideas session. First of all, I don't think everybody needs to be funny in a session. I think that's a clear point. That this isn't about let's get together the funniest people in the organisation and they'll be the most productive in the ideas session. So in that way, you don't need to be funny at all to participate in an idea session. In terms of a sense of humour, I think there's degrees of that. So I think I've seen a lot of people who are brilliant in an idea session that look like they're not in, they're kind of more chin strokey, but then they'll come out with some genius. So kind of those introverts that appear like they might not be kind of up for the big laugh can often be the most important contributors in the sessions. But what I think they'll have benefited from is creating an environment where humour is embraced and where it's okay to have a laugh and suggest things that might seem funny, weird, absurd. So I think there's a difference there. I think if there's genuinely someone in the room that is really not up for thinking differently, because I think that's what we're talking about. And I find that so rarely. Literally, I've run thousands of idea sessions. There's almost never somebody in there who's going to be destructively uncooperative. Once or twice, I've had to suggest somebody, might be distracted by something else going back at the office, but that's, not for at least 10 years. So on the one hand, it's really not an issue if someone's there and they don't seem to be kind of enjoying the laugh. It's not like that. That can feel like, you know, the intimidating night out or stag do where everyone's got to be up for it. That's not really what I'm talking about. It's more like it's more a kind of a humorous mindset, if that makes sense.
It does, and I think linked to that, there's a question coming. So, you know, for those people who are more naturally reserved, how do we start with this type of approach? Like, you know, what's the catalyst then, as you walk into that room, that can kind of turn people from that, I guess, more reserved mindset into that more creative mindset? What icebreaker? I know you don't like the term, but what icebreakers do you use to get people into that frame of mind?
So, again, a great question. I think the important points are it's about context and culture. So work out who's in the room and what's going to make them feel comfortable, because everybody has to excuse me, feel comfortable with getting into that mindset. And it is more about a kind of a more relaxed, open-minded, imaginative and playful mindset, which is why I made the point that it's not about getting on all fours and making animal noises and everyone being forced to be an extrovert. It's more a way of thinking. So if even just one or two people in the room you think might be uncomfortable with really turning it up, you know, in the first 5 or 10 minutes, do it gently. It's much more about being more relaxed, being more human, and bringing their own weekend self into the room. And I think as the facilitator of that, you've really got to judge that carefully, because the very last thing you want to do is make people feel uncomfortable or like this isn't somewhere where I want to be, because you want those, like you say, the more reserved, the more introverted, just as open to suggesting ideas that have popped into their head that they might otherwise, you know, not feel comfortable to. And it's using humor to do that. And so there is a skill in judging the tone in the room. I think everybody, you know, as human beings, we are up for that as long as we know we feel comfortable and safe. And it isn't about kind of, you know, everybody being as funny as possible. It absolutely isn't. It's just about knowing what humor does to our brains and getting that right in the room.
And just judging that, Tim, just building on a couple of questions that are here. Do you find that it works the same for all cultures and nationalities? And how do you also deal with maybe cultures that are more politically correct or do have certain sensitivities? How do you navigate that?
Yes, again, great question. And it again, down to context and culture. And if it's culture because you're somewhere different in the world, you absolutely need to understand that. And I've run sessions in Japan, you know, in Tokyo, in Shanghai, in China, in India. And it is about understanding the culture and the group of people you've got, what is funny and what isn't, because everybody's is different. And it would absolutely be the wrong thing to do to go into one group and you know, start with a knob gag. And in another group, that might be exactly the right thing to do. It's about making people feel relaxed and comfortable and their real selves. And, you know, I see it more like everyone taking off the proverbial tie and throwing that, you know, into the corner of the room and just relaxing. And it's whatever's appropriate at that time. And in some organizations, that can be more formal. In some, it can be about asking, you know, are there any words that, you know, would you rather we didn't swear at all? It's understanding what's right for that group. You know, you can be funny on CBeebies and you can be funny on Netflix, you know, and it's understanding the difference and what feels right for this group. And it is back to, I think, surprising truths. So if that's at the root of comedy, then the truths are different for each culture and group. And what you're looking for is something that binds that group together. What would we all laugh at because we all recognize it as true, but hadn't thought about it that way. So it does require understanding the group, the culture of that group.
No, and that's great, Tim. And I think there's lots of very positive comments and, you know, coming through on the chat. So thank you for all of that. I don't see many hands up, so I'll keep going to the questions that are coming through. Tim, what's the most illuminating session you've run? You mentioned the Virgin Airways one, but can you just give us an example of where you've walked in and thought, oh goodness me, this is going to be a tough crowd, and you've come up with some really surprising outcomes from that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few that spring to mind. One I love actually is so when I was at What If, we ran a big session for Her Majesty's Court Services. So this is this would have been about 2010, so around the time of the big recession. So a bunch of really senior civil servants, they ran the court services in the UK, and they'd been tasked by the government to innovate, right? We need to change, we need to make some efficiencies. I think they were essentially being asked to, like, we need to cut the budgets significantly, but we need to think differently, we need to do it smart. You need to come up with some ideas. And they'd come to us in a panic. Right? These were men and women who'd been worked in the civil service all their careers. They were in their late 50s, early 60s, and did not think of themselves as creative at all. And they thought, we don't do creative. We send people to prison. We don't know how to do this. And we said to them, right, well, we're not doing it. We're not just going. This isn't you leave this problem with us and we'll come back to you with some ideas. We're going to take you on a journey with us. And we had them for 2 or 3 days. And by the end, when we actually then had an idea session, and I was getting them to laugh, and I was getting them to do things like Chicken Monster, and some of them towards the, and we came up with some great ideas that they've adopted, and we're using a lot of these techniques. One big thing we did for them was we redesigned how they organized the day. It used to be that at the beginning of a court's day, they would have a list of here are the cases and in this order, and if they're not going in this order, so if the solicitor for case number 3 doesn't turn up, we don't go to case number 4. And so there was a lot of inefficiencies like that, and we stole a lot from the world of theatre, where in theatres they have a stage manager and a philosophy of the show must go on, and there's a few things they do to make sure that happens. So we stole a lot of things from there. So we came up with a lot of ideas and changed the way they work. But we did it because we got them into a mindset where they realized that they were creative people. If you can have a laugh, if you can make someone else laugh, you can come up with an original idea. And we made them realize that. And by the end of that session, actually, a few of them were really quite emotional because they were rethinking how they defined themselves. That's why it stuck with me, I think, is that they'd gone from thinking we are not creative people. I'm a pen pushing suit and I make stuff happen in the way that it's always happened. And at the end, they thought, I'm an ideas machine. I can reinvent how we work. And we've filled the wall full of ideas, and we've come up with 1 or 2 that we're going to implement. And it was about helping them realize that when they were kids, they had a playfulness and an imagination that is still in there. They'd just forgotten how to use it. And by introducing humor, we helped them unleash that. So yeah, that stuck with me a bit.
That's a great example. Thank you. So we're in a virtual world now, Tim. Are you seeing, so, you talk about these, the groups you've met with and you've done that, and, I guess the physical proximity can be helpful in some of these instances with lots of breakout rooms and things like that. We have Teams, we have Zooms, we have wonderful functionality. But have you seen any new innovative approaches now coming through to keep what you're saying alive in a virtual environment? So a lot of people on this call will be having big team meetings in a virtual environment. What are your top tips of how that can be managed and other approaches that can be used?
Yeah, so it's a brilliant question, and it was a thing I found almost straight away once lockdown had happened. Was there were a few things I'd got booked in where we were all going to be getting together either as a big event or a face-to-face workshop, and I had to rethink how to do it. And I was a bit worried about how's this going to work, because I'd always pushed back on doing it over Zoom. Some things work better. You need to work just as hard at getting everyone into that right mindset, but it's quite easy to do, over Zoom. The thing that actually made it easier in a way is before COVID, before lockdown, I think there were things that were a barrier to thinking differently, to creativity. One was inertia. There was no real push to kind of go, we have to think differently. Things were kind of working all right. And the other was just this kind of lack of fresh stimulus. We'd all got stuck in habits. And suddenly here we're all at home, we're working out with Joe Wicks in the morning, we're dancing with Oti Mabuse in the afternoon, we're homeschooling the kids in between. All these habits we'd had before, drive to work the same way, sit next to the same person, have the same thing for lunch, all out the window. At the same time as there was suddenly a need to think differently and come up with new ideas. So our brains were open to it. I'm already doing new stuff. My old habits are being challenged. So I'm having to think differently already. And there was an imperative. We need to rethink how we're doing stuff. What was missing was the way to do it and the way to get together. And what I found I was doing for a lot of clients in March and April was running these kind of sessions, Zoom sessions. So Zoom on Teams. And the few things I found that we needed to do differently was, one, before I'd have run an idea session over a whole day. You can't do that. You can't Zoom for more than about 90 minutes is max. What that's allowed me to do is you build in a bit of overnight time. So you can run a one-day idea session basically over the course of a week. What that gives you is the chance to sleep on things. And so using that deliberately, I think, has made a big difference, is a real improvement. So that's one thing, is kind of breaking up. So you run an idea session, you get started, you get everyone into a right mindset. People are at home. So in some ways, it's easier to get them thinking more playfully and less, formally, because we're at home. Might be sat in my PJs. So kind of you can use a bit of that. So you've then got some overnight time that you can use. The other practical thing is the breakout rooms are brilliant. I think you've got them on Teams, but on Zoom as well, you can have everybody together, share the challenge, start some thinking, and then send people off into groups of 3s or 4s. And as the facilitator, what you used to have to do is then remember where everyone's gone, run round and tell everyone back into the main room in 3 minutes. I used to have a forfeit called the dance of lateness. So just to kind of help everyone get back into the room all on time. With the breakout rooms, you just click, everyone, we're back together in a minute. And so kind of you get as a participant, you don't, I'll do things to make sure people have stood up and walked around and everything else, but you can go into your breakout room just on the same screen, and then suddenly you're back together. So you can change the dynamic of who's bouncing off who easier. So there are definitely fewer barriers to using Zoom and Teams creatively than I'd ever imagined, and more advantages to doing it than I could have foreseen. So I think it can work brilliantly. Actually, the challenge is how you share your thinking, and there are ways of doing that, lots of techniques, but I won't go into them now.
I think the dance of lateness or the song of lateness is still something that can absolutely be used in that virtual environment, and is a very good tool. So let me it's a question asked by John, and I think it is very true. You don't often see this as a strength that's reflected on CVs. Our CVs tend to be very business orientated, very straightforward, very traditional in that sense. But everything you're talking about here is so important. Do you see in your line of work it reflects on CVs? How should people, I don't know, think about framing this?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it's a symptom of the fact that I don't think we focus on it through school, through university, through early career. Bizarrely, creativity is not taught. If anything, it's taught out of us. We're taught that there's a right answer and a wrong answer, and we're not taught how to be expansive in our thinking and come up with multiple answers. That's still drummed into kids through school. I've seen it with my own kids, which is bizarre, especially when you realize that, there was it Forbes, the World Economic Forum, they do a thing every few years, ask employers around the world what are the most important skills you look for in employees. I think 10 years ago, creativity was 10th. Last time they did it, it was 3rd. And above it was only problem solving and critical thinking, which for me are all part of creativity. Anyway, so we know it's a vital skill, but I think people still don't put it on the CV because it was not how I was taught to do CVs. It's not what I was taught at school or university. I absolutely think it should be. Your ability and some evidence of the great ideas you've come up with, we should be looking to do that and asking for it. And if not, at the very least, when you get to interview stage, it's something to really look for then. Not in a, again, as I've said before, it's not in a kind of tell me a joke, make me laugh, but it's a kind of a very human thing. Is like, it's something to look for, evidence of, sense of humor. And that's part and parcel of the ability to think differently, I think. Yeah.
So again, just in the absence of hands, I'll just go to what's been written in the Teams sidebar. With something like Peter Kay's car share, how much of that was scripted, and how much of that was improv?
Yeah, and again, a great question, because I think it's a comedy, and a lot of shows I think are evolving this way, that more is kind of improv. To say kind of, because what happens is I see it as part of the writing process. So with Car Chef, for example, we wrote the whole of the first series before we showed it to Peter, actually. So I wrote it with a guy called Paul Coleman, who I worked with at What If. After we'd written 6 episodes, he said, well, I went to school with Peter, I'm still friends with Peter. I'll get him to have a look at it, see what he thinks. He'll tell us where we've gone wrong. If he likes it, he might set us up, with an introduction somewhere. That's what we were hoping for, really. But he loved it, and he asked if he could get involved initially as a director, and then he thought, actually, I think I could do that part. And then when we got to film it, before you get to that point, I think once you've cast it, you then do a kind of a table read process where you look for some improv around a scene. And it's the same with the new show I've got. I've got a show out called Meet the Richardsons with John Richardson and his wife, Lucy Beaumont. It's a kind of it's supposed to be a mock doc, Curb Your Enthusiasm type thing set in the north of England. It was on Dave earlier this year. We're about to start filming the second series next week, and the Christmas episodes, which feels weird in this heat. But that's the same as you write it, and then you'll kind of improv it as you go through it, and then you'll rewrite it based on what seems much more natural. So with any show that's supposed to feel naturalistic, I think you have to do that. Otherwise, you can see the words, when in the final product. So you do that, and then when you're actually shooting it, you'll probably shoot it a few ways. You'll stick to the script, and then you'll go, right, now how else might we do this same scene? And often I think there's a nice truism now that the writing process is done in thirds, really. A third of it is the original scripting. A third of it you then do actually on the shoot. And then a third of it is done in the edit. So actually, while you're editing things, it'll come together slightly differently. So I hope that answers the question. A lot of it's scripted, but the creative process continues all the way until you deliver it.
Fantastic. Well, I think we've probably got time for one more quick fire question. If anyone's got a burning question for Tim, go on. Or we could just spend the last minute playing Chicken Monster or Stir Fry or Acted or anything like that if people prefer.
That was going to be my question. My question is, please, can we play Chicken Monster, Tim?
Let's do it then. Right, so is everyone ready? I can see about 9 of you, but I'm going to presume all 100 are going to be. So
are we breaking protocol and allowing everyone to go off mute, Tim?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, let's do that. It'll go mental. What a great way to finish.
Let's break the platform.
So we'll do it. So copy me, and then everyone can exaggerate what I did just slightly, and whoever I've seen, I'll exaggerate it back again. We'll just keep going. Let's mirror it until someone turns the whole thing off. Yeah. All right, ready? Okay. Chicken Monster.
Chicken Monster. Chicken Monster.
Chicken Monster.
Chicken Monster. Chicken Monster. That might.
Wow. This could run. I'm not quite sure where to go now. I've completely lost my script. But it's no look. Look, Tim.
The text, John.
Look, it's a fantastic session. You'll all be delighted to know that that last bit in particular is on a link into LinkedIn. It's all recorded. So thank you ever so much. You can see yourself in all your Chicken Monster glory